Welcome, everybody, to Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, igniting leadership excellence. I'm Rick, and this is my co-host, Emily.
Welcome back, everyone.
Today, we are on episode number 40 of season 2, a commitment to listen, unlocking growth through presence. Before we get started, though, I want to remind everybody that Emily and I talk about anything and everything related to leadership, and you do not have to be a firefighter to listen.
Yeah.
Also, over the last few episodes, we've talked about bringing on guests. Well, I'm happy to announce that on September the 25th, let me try that again. September 25th, we're going to have our first guest.
Yay.
If you've been listening to the podcast, you know that I'm a member of the John Maxwell Certified Leadership Team, and the Executive Vice President, Chris Robinson, has offered to come on to the podcast. And so Emily and I are excited about that. We are recording here in July right now. And so in a couple weeks, Emily and I are going to interview Chris, and it will be posted on September the 25th. And so today we are talking about the lost art of listening to begin with. Dr. Joyce Brothers, she said, listening, not imitation, may be the sincerest form of flattery. So lots of times people assume that someone is listening, but they are not.
What was that?
Yes, thank you. That's a good one, Emily. Yeah. To the point. Yeah, listening is not practiced very well. And we've been talking about mentoring in some of these previous episodes. And if we're not listening to people, that's going to sabotage that person's growth. So today we're going to talk about how listening creates communication, learning, and transformation. So Emily, I'll turn it over here to you.
Yeah, so let's talk first about communication breakdown when the message doesn't land. So there are three basic elements of communication, and those are the sender, the message, and the receiver. So listening is the receiver's responsibility.
Absolutely. And we're going to dig a little bit more into that part.
Yeah. So what happens when people don't listen? The message is lost or misunderstood. Frustration builds, growth stalls. Mentoring becomes very surface level, or worse, just completely pointless.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, we're going to dig a little bit more into this and some of the obstructions that occur to listening. Have you ever felt unheard? I'm sure you have.
Oh, yeah.
I have. Emily,
Yep.
you've been there? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what does that do to your motivation? Yeah. How does that make you feel when you feel like you haven't been heard? Now listen. Listen. There is a mental workload to real listening.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you just don't feel valued either as the listener.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. And here in a few minutes, I'm going to
Listener.
hit on that with a conversation I just had this morning who raised that very fact, Emily.
Yeah. So why don't people listen is the million-dollar question. There is a mental workload of real listening, and listening requires effort. It requires focus, patience, curiosity. And by curiosity, it means like engaging, asking them questions.
Absolutely.
If you don't understand or you're trying to figure out like what your response is going to be, just ask questions. And that engages the brain, and that's where many fall short in these categories.
Yeah. Emily, talking about when you don't understand is rather than just let the conversation go on, or if you're in a class, stop and say, I don't understand what you're saying. In May, I was in Emerald Isle, North Carolina, teaching at Bogue Banks Leadership Conference. And during a break, I was talking to one of the chief officers from the fire department there on the Bogue Banks. He was telling me about the incident that he had. He was working out on mutual aid at a fire. And he said, we had a fire in the Frog. And I stopped, and when I'm trying to process it, and then he continued on. He said, yeah, the fire was up there in the Frog. And I said, excuse me. I said, what's the Frog? Frog, what's the Frog? And he looked at me puzzled, and he says, well, it's the front room over the garage. He says, what do you guys call it? I said, the room over the garage. But the point being there is, hey, he's in North Carolina, we're in Colorado, and even though we're in the fire service, there's, different terms for the same room. I
Yeah.
didn't understand what he was saying. So stop him and say, hey, could you tell me what you were talking about? So many times people don't do that.
Yeah.
They just let things go.
Yeah.
And I have had this happen with an individual where I would always say, think out of the box, think out of the box. And I had known this guy since 1990. So let's fast forward to September of 2007 after a drill I had conducted. And I said, you got to think out of the box. So 1990 to 2007, I'd known this guy. And then on that afternoon in September 2007, he said, what do you mean, think out of the box? He said, that has never made any sense to me. I was stunned that I had known that guy for 17 years and he never knew what I said, but he never took the time to ask.
Yeah.
So yeah, just like what Emily is saying is we have to ask. And then also is there are some common obstacles to communications. First thing is these stupid cell phones. Yeah,
Mhm.
they could be a blessing, but I think many more times that they are a curse.
Yeah.
Laptops and the myth of multitasking. Listen, folks, multitasking, all that is just rapidly switching from one task to the next. And I know Emily and I and Emily's mom, we could debate this thing because we have had this debate about, well, yes, multitasking is true, and we as women can multitask.
I can't anymore, but
Yeah.
I will
And
admit that.
so that could be a fun debate and a fun conversation, but that's not where we're going to go.
Scientific.
Yeah, today there could be mental noise. What that means is you're thinking of a response. Huh, you're not paying attention to
Yeah.
what the person is saying. You're thinking about what you are going to say. And I hope you're not practicing this, but you may be practicing that where you're thinking about what can I say next. But when you talk to somebody, next time you're talking to somebody, just watch their eyes and watch their facial expressions. And you can start to pick up as to whether or not they're actually listening to you or if they are formulating their response before you are even finished.
Yeah.
And then another one is the emotional barriers. Oh, that nasty word of pride and assumptions that we are so prone to have in our lives and making assumptions before we even hear the other person out.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the mental noise, it does take a lot of discipline to
Mm.
not formulate your answer as the other person is talking. That
Yeah,
takes a lot of self-discipline.
yeah, you're absolutely right. Especially if we've already had a negative encounter, with the other person, or if there's something about their character that we don't like. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can jump to conclusions really quick.
And it's okay to not respond back right away. It's okay to pause and consider your response.
Yeah,
Like that actually might help you a lot better,
yeah,
have a
yeah,
more tactful response.
yeah. You're absolutely right.
So we want to challenge our listeners, if you're listening. When was the last time you gave someone your full undivided attention?
Mm. Yeah. Hey, that's a challenge there, folks, is
Yep.
when have you given somebody your full undivided attention? And so as you go through the Bible and the Gospels, there's many times Jesus talked about ears to hear, ears to
Mm-hmm.
hear. Ears to hear, folks, build trust.
Yeah.
If you're talking to somebody or if you're in a coaching relationship or a mentoring relationship, and you're the person during the mentoring or the coaching, and you're not listening to what the other person is saying, that is not building trust whatsoever.
Yeah.
As I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we're recording here at the beginning of July. Well, this morning, I had coffee with a young man who visited our singles group at church, which my wife and I lead that group. I had a great conversation with this man, but he was sharing with me difficulties in other places that he has been where he has gone those small groups as a visitor. And it's like, what are you doing here?
Mm.
And he says, absolutely, I have not felt welcome in those certain situations. And he said, and then he said, one of them, where somebody did talk to me, they were just talking about themselves. He said they never asked me any questions, never asked me what brought me to the group, never asked me what do I do for a living.
Hmm.
None of that. It was just all about them, them, them. And folks, he never went back to that group. And there's a lot of organizations like that. And he didn't specify what type of a group that was that he visited. Now, I've recently had an experience with a veterans breakfast in another city. I was invited to it. I've gone twice, and even though I'm a veteran, yeah, the attitude there of many of them has come across to me as like, who are you and why are you here?
Hmm.
And it's very unwelcoming.
Yeah.
And and so does that make me feel valued? Well, no. You know,
No.
I'm a veteran of two branches of the military, and I like being around other veterans. And generally, there's conversations that take place when I'm with another veteran. But, when you're not being listened to, it's like, why am I here?
Yeah.
When we want to listen to somebody, we truly listen. As Emily said, that effort, we send that other person a message is, you matter to me, and what you're saying matters.
Yeah.
And in a mentoring relationship, the mentor must listen to the person that's being mentored. If you're not, don't do it. Yeah, don't do it. Just be upright and say, you know what, I don't think this is going to work for me. And I suggest that you go look up Joe Schmuckatelli. They are really, really good at this. But then on the other side of that, that's the person, if I'm being mentored, I need to listen to my mentor, not shut
Mhm.
them out or not, like we've already said, try to formulate an answer ahead of time. Emily, one of the benefits of being a member of the Maxwell Certified Leadership Team is mentorship. I've been in the mentorship program with a team now. Oh, I think August will be 5 years that I've been in the mentorship
Wow.
program.
Yeah.
And there's calls that I choose which calls to get on because there's a call six at least there's multiple calls 6 days of the week, nothing on Sunday. So I do have to be selective because I could just have all my time taken up. But I get on those calls, I listen to the teaching that the mentor has, I listen to the questions that other people bring to the mentor, and there's at times that I have questions myself that I bring to the mentor. And I always have my notebook and I'm taking notes. Even if I'm not asking a question, I'm learning from what is being said. Matter of fact, we've mentioned Chris Robinson already. Chris does the Monday morning business building calls. And I've been on the calls with Chris before and say, hey, here's my challenge, or I need help in this particular area. And then Chris has mentored me in those particular areas.
Yeah.
So,
So John Maxwell has a quote that says, mutual concern creates connection between people. So really, the connection begins with listening.
yes.
And so now we're going to talk about what is creating a listening
May
environment.
may
But
I may I
yeah,
interrupt real quick,
yeah.
Emily? I just thought of something related to that, and I just taught this last week when I was doing another seminar up in the mountains on rapid tactical decision making and situational awareness. Was talking about commander's intent or leader's intent, and one of the key elements of that is a German word called Einheit.
Mm,
Einheit, Einheit, which means mutual trust,
mm.
unity, and cohesion.
Wow.
And that is something that really comes into play with communication. So I cut you off
Oh, that's
there.
okay.
No.
So, how do we create a listening environment? Here's some practical tips to help you to have an undistracted mentoring session. So, one is simply turn off notifications.
Yes.
Eliminate physical distractions. So let's say I probably would not meet at B Dubs, for instance, where there's a million TVs and so many distractions for mentoring. Like choose your location.
Yeah. Can I jump back there to turn off
Yeah.
notifications? At work, I used to have email notifications and that thing would pop, and it was distraction. And I thought, how in the world do I get rid of these stupid things? And so I dug in, I went to the help and I found out, oh, yeah, this is how I can do it. We had another fella, and I really like this guy. He's another veteran, and sometimes he would come up to the battalion chief's office and get on the extra computer. But he had an email notification that he was a Navy veteran. Well, it was a bosun's pipe. So every time he was getting, every time he would get an email, the bosun's pipe would sound, and then you would hear email arriving. Just like he was on board the ship, and I'd be piping on, the skipper.
That's funny.
Yeah, it is. It is funny. So go ahead there, Emily.
The other one is set expectations up front that this is a focused time and they know that you have your undivided attention. Use open body language, eye contact, and affirming gestures just to keep them knowing that you're interacting with them. Even if you're not saying anything, you are following what they're saying. Something that one of my mentors does is when I'm talking to her, she's writing things down. So I know she's writing what I'm saying or she's writing her own thoughts. And then she comes back and reads her notes. And then it's also helpful in future sessions because she goes back to those notes and says, like, well, you said blah, 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 blah. And that definitely holds accountability for the mentee as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, that's a great thing. And Emily's talking about body language, and so often we hear, well, if somebody's crossing their arms, I mean that they're closing you out. Not all the time.
Right. I cross my arms all the time.
Yeah, when
Yeah.
when I'm thinking, lots of times I will cross my arms and lean in. So just because somebody crosses their arms does not mean that they are, mad at you or cutting you out. There have been times where I'm wearing a short sleeve shirt and I'm someplace and I'm cold. I'm cold. And so I cross my arms because they're not going to turn up the heat, or I, left my sweatshirt someplace. So be careful with that. There's probably 100 books out there on body language, and body language is important, but make sure you don't read the wrong message into that body language.
Yeah.
But here's a tip. You know, don't just listen to the words, listen to the heart behind the words.
Yeah.
And I remember I was dealing with an individual when I was a battalion chief, and he was on my shift, and it was rather difficult circumstance, and we were having a really deep conversation in the office at his fire station between the two of us. And he bore his heart to me. He shared with me why he came into the fire service. And he liked the concept of teamwork and he liked the concept of camaraderie. And that is what drew him into the fire service. Now, there were other issues that had to be dealt with, but at least I had an insight into his heart is what brought him into it. And that did change with my outlook in a few areas. Nevertheless, there were still some serious things that we had to deal with.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about communicating here and the body language, eliminating physical distractions, but growth requires silence. Just like that. Silence. If you're mentoring somebody, you're coaching somebody, you're helping somebody out, and you ask a question, pause. Give that person a chance to respond. I'm thinking of one individual in particular that is a thinker. And when I would make a statement or I would ask a question, whether it was one-on-one or a small group discussion out at the fire station or after a training, he needed to think about it. And as I learned more about communication, it was like he's not avoiding the question. He's taken the time to think through his answer. And so we can really jump to conclusions from that way also. I think that most people are able to tell is like, okay, the other person, they're trying to come up with a good answer because, they're in deep and they're in trouble and they're trying to come up with an answer to cover themselves. I'm not talking about situations like that. I'm talking about just everyday, ordinary conversations or where we're helping people grow. Give another person an opportunity to think through their answer before they respond.
Well, yeah, people process differently.
Absolutely.
I can be a bit of a slower processor where I can't give the answer right away. So sometimes I've learned as like a mentee is to say like, let me think about that. So they're not just like staring at you awkwardly as you're just like thinking, because sometimes you feel that pressure to like give that answer
Yeah.
really fast and it's just not coming.
Yeah. You may need to
So,
follow it up with a clarifying question or
yeah.
ask the other person should I word this in a different way? And you know what? My wife and I have been married now almost 38 years, and we have a really great marriage. Have been blessed by God, the marriage that we have. And we have to clarify our communication. Yeah, just the other day, Deb was asking me a question, and I said, I don't understand what you're asking me. Reword it, in a different way. And so she did, and it's like, bing, oh yeah, okay, now I know what you are talking about. So yeah, make sure the other person understands, what you are asking.
Yeah. So, when is mentoring the most powerful? It's when questions lead to discovery, feedback is genuinely heard and processed, and then each person walks away with insight.
Yeah, that each person walks away with insight. I can learn from you, you can learn from me.
Yeah,
Emily
absolutely.
and I, yeah, we'll go out for coffee and I will bounce ideas off of her from my business, Fire Officer Leadership Academy. She'll provide feedback. She will ask me questions about her business, Emily's Delights, which Emily makes cake pops. Fantastic cake pops, folks. If you're here in Colorado, you ought to buy them. Look up Emily's Delights on the internet. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, and also speaking of Emily, I neglected to mention this at the beginning. For those of you who are listening on audio, obviously you can't see this, but for those of you, and we know there's absolutely one individual that watches this on our YouTube channel, Fire Officer Leadership Academy. Emily has a brand new
Yeah,
fire-related shirt. It
cool.
has fire engines on it. It's got
Fire
a fire hydrant. Yeah,
bows.
yeah. She
It's like the
got with the
perfect feminine
yeah,
shirt.
yeah, she got with the program,
Yeah. Etsy.
Yeah, yeah, Etsy. She gets
Yeah.
the stuff from Etsy. But as you could probably tell, Emily and I really enjoy working the podcast together. We have a lot of fun, doing this.
Yeah.
But yeah, coming back to our topic right here. Hey, when you're listening to someone intently, make sure you acknowledge that you're listening. Yeah, uh-huh, shaking your head, and
Yeah.
then yeah, paraphrase what you have heard. And that not only lets the other person know that you've been listening, but it helps you process that. And if you've repeated something back, that's no, not quite. You missed that, or they will add something else in. A
Yeah.
prime example of that is when I was still on the job as a battalion chief, and I arrived at the scene of an incident that where I was going to take command from the initial incident commander. That person had already given their radio report, their size up and initial directions. I would arrive on scene. I would contact command, say, I'm on scene and I understand. I'll give you an example. I understand we have a two-story residential structure. We got a fire on the second floor on the Bravo Charlie corner. You're stretching an attack line through the Alpha side. You've got the second due engine securing a water supply. You've got the first in truck is going to take care of search and rescue, and so forth like that. And then I'd pause and I'd say, is that all correct? And then that would give that other person the opportunity to say that's correct, Chief, but we are also doing, that I may have missed that or that's correct. And I'd say, okay, then I would notify dispatch that I was taking command. We referred to it as closing the communications loop. So that's what we need to do on an everyday basis. So Emily,
Yeah.
we're pretty much getting close to wrapping this one up here.
Yeah. So we want to leave you guys with the thought that the best mentors are often the best listeners. They hear what's said and what's not said.
So yeah, as we wrap this episode up of Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, we've been talking about mentoring. And if you're a regular listener to our podcast, by now you should be picking up on the theme that I am a major advocate of personal growth and development and professional growth and development.
Yeah.
But with that being said, listening is an act of respect and it's a catalyst for growth.
Yep. And distractions and ego sabotage communication.
That's correct. So true listening builds that trust, connection, and transformation. And so, Emily, do we have a call to action for this week?
Yeah, so we want to leave our listeners with our challenge for this week. If you are mentoring or being mentored, practice full presence. Close the laptop, and unless it's a Zoom meeting, you can't do that. Silence the phone, open your ears, and you will be amazed at what you hear. And I do want to leave you too with another challenge. Is a lot of times when I'm heading into conversations, I usually pray, like, give me eyes to see and ears to hear and show me their heart.
Yeah,
And that's been
that's good.
a game changer, absolute game changer for me.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Emily,
Mhm.
for adding that. And so, a question I also have to ask is, how has listening or your lack of it impacted your life? How has it impacted your growth on the job, or your growth in your marriage, or a relationship? Now, we'd love to hear about that. So, as we wrap up this episode, if you've liked what we're doing here, then please subscribe and like. Hopefully, this is useful to you. Uh, my email address, Rick at Firehouse Leadership Academy, is in the show notes. Also, my website address is in the show notes. And this episode will be coming out every other Thursday. This one here, it will be the 14th of August. I also write a weekly leadership blog that's posted on my website every Monday and then on my LinkedIn profile on Wednesdays. So, one final thing, I encourage you, get my book, The Fire
Yeah.
Officer. Yeah, The Fire Officer. Yeah, let's try that one again. Yeah, my book, The Furnace of Leadership Development. My business is the
Mhm.
Fire Officer Leadership Academy. So, Emily,
Yeah.
anything final before we close this one out?
If you're looking for a mentor, I highly recommend to visit his website. You won't regret it.
Well,
See what services he has to offer.
well, thank you, Emily. Okay, folks, until next time, we'll see you later.
Bye.